The theory of evolution by natural direction. Hello, Roddy Bullock here, founder of Creation Reformation and your host for today's video, where I relate a recent conversation that I had with an evolutionist who disagreed with me over the concept and meaning of the term random as applied to evolutionary processes. Indeed, this evolutionist couldn't help but believe that deep down in that word somewhere there was room for some directionality attached to evolutionary processes. Now, if you are an evolutionist, don't click away. I want to hear from you. You can reach me at the email address below. This email comes to me and me alone, and I will respond personally. I want you to let me know, as this evolutionist attempted to, how I am wrong in any of my facts, logic, or reasoning. Now let's go. At Creation Reformation, we assert and defend a statement that we call the natural selection paradox, and here it is. Every current species evolved from a first life form solely by cumulative, random evolutionary change. Now, if you ponder that statement for a few moments, you will realize that if this is a true statement, then it completely destroys the theory of evolution by natural selection as a scientific explanation for all current species. And I am asserting that this must be a true statement if evolutionary theory is true. That is, if the theory of evolution by natural selection is the explanation for all current species, then this statement must be true. But this statement cannot be defended scientifically, thus the paradox, the natural selection paradox, because despite natural selection's role in nature, this statement must be true. Now, if you would like a full explanation for how we derived the natural selection paradox, I would invite you to go to our YouTube channel and look for a YouTube video entitled Dropping the Bomb on Evolution. In fact, indeed, it was in response to this video that the evolutionist who is the subject of our current video was responding. And he contacted me with an email that had a subject line that said this: a long-winded but well-intentioned response to your video. And indeed, it was long-winded, and those are typically hard to take seriously because they rarely get to the point. But it started out nicely. This evolutionist wants to know that I'm well, and of course he says he's going to be very harsh. He's not going to pull any punches. He says, sorry if this is too harsh. Now, let me assure you, if you are an evolutionist and you would like to contact me, you cannot be too harsh for me. I deal with evolutionists all the time. I deal with them mostly on Facebook. And of course, on Facebook, we're not dealing with the cream of the crop often, but I can assure you that I have seen the harshest of harsh comments directed at me and our organization on Facebook. For example, I have had to put up this sign often based on the Facebook comments that come in, because as I engage with evolutionists, even when they start out polite, by the time I get them to agree with me and they realize that they are believing a lie, they get abusive and often use explicit language, and I have to use this sign here because they are indeed mad Darwinists. So, for example, I have a Facebook post open right now. It is June 6, 2025, and there is a Facebook post, and I'm going to pull just a few comments from that. Here's one of them. Here is another one. This, I'm sure, is a delightful fellow here. Here are a couple more. I'm only going to leave these up for a moment. All I want you to do is get the idea that you do not have to worry about being harsh with me. If you want to be harsh, if it's not appropriate, I will simply ignore it. At some point, I will probably collect comments like this from people like this and make some kind of a post to show what typical evolutionists look like online, because they are often not very attractive people. Okay, now this person was not like that. This person, who I'm going to call Bob, he was well-intentioned and he was polite, okay? And he was not too harsh. So he wants to acknowledge a few things here that's, again, polite. And then he says, that said, I think your argument contains several logical and conceptual errors, and I'd like to walk through them. Fair enough. That's what I asked for. That's what I'm asking for in this video. And I'm always keen to engage an evolutionist on these issues. Now, he started out with a topic which was not helpful on religion and geographic influence. I'm not sure what the point was, but it is off topic for the topic of the video that was called Dropping the Bomb on Evolution, but indeed he spent a few lines there. But then he gets to addressing the argument about evolution. And let me make a point here, because indeed Bob was a nice fellow. But he says here that I have in this video presented a false dichotomy. It's a logical fallacy. He says specifically that I assert that one must either accept that all current species evolve solely through random mutations and natural selection or reject evolution entirely. This is a false choice. That is, in fact, not what the message of the Dropping the Bomb on Evolution video is. So right from the beginning, I realized that I'm going to have some issues here with Bob that are very common among evolutionists. They are not careful readers or listeners. They tend to project their own ideas of what they believe I believe into their comments, and this is an example of that. This statement here is simply not true, and if you want to look for yourself, again, I invite you, go watch the video for yourself. It's a bit long. Put it on 1.25 or 1.5 speed, and you'll get through it quickly. Okay. Now, Tom continues with the topic he calls misuse of the term random, and here is where we're going to get to the real meat of this video because I think it's important for us all to understand. Again, he accuses me of something that's not true. He says you repeatedly misuse the concept of random. He actually invoked the Princess Bride, that he says he doesn't believe I know what this word means, or whatever that quote is from the Princess Bride. And he says here, in a scientific context, random doesn't mean anything is equally likely or pure chaos. I agree with him on that, and that's not the way I've used random ever, not in this video or ever. So why he's saying this is a little bit of a mystery. He says correctly, it means that specific outcomes are unpredictable. I agree with that. That is an adequate synonym for the word random. Random genetic changes are unpredictable genetic changes. The two go hand in hand. If he had put a period here, we would have been happy. But he continues, not that they are uninfluenced by underlying structure or probability. And here is the first hint that he has some idea of what random means that is different than mine. He mentions this business of they are not uninfluenced, and there's some structure or probability. Now, what he says here is actually true. Of course, even random mutations are caused by something. There's some structure, and of course, there's some theoretical probability, but that doesn't make them unpredictable and not random, or predictable and not random. But here are some hints that in his use of this term random and his understanding of how it operates in nature, there is room for some idea of being influenced by structure or probability. I want us to be clear here that random means random. Let me show you this screenshot that I pulled off today from the University of Southern California, Berkeley. They have a whole thread, a whole online course, Understanding Evolution. And this is what they say about mutations. Again, this is Berkeley, this is not me. And here's what they say. Mutations are random, period. The mechanisms of evolution, natural selection and genetic drift, work with the random variation generated by mutation. We have to be very clear. There is no fudging on this point. This is not controversial in evolution circles, except with people like this nice evolutionist who I'm debating now. The term random means random. Evolutionists often take issue with me when I use the term random as if it's some kind of bad word. But the fact is, mutations in the offspring that lead to new genotypes and phenotypes on Earth, as we'll see in a few minutes, arise randomly. And it is the only way they arise on Earth, randomly, and it is random variation generated by mutation. Okay, we got that out of the way. Now, it was clear I was not going to get anywhere. My friend Bob was very, he was a little verbose in his emails. It was hard to follow sometimes where he was going. At some point, I said this: if you want to continue this conversation, I will do so by posing statements to you and see if you agree if they are true or not. Because if I do this, and if you are willing, I can lead you to a place where you see for yourself that the natural selection paradox is true. Now, indeed, I've done this many times online. Many times I have taken an evolutionist through a series of questions that deal with logical and rational aspects of evolutionary theory, and I have gotten them to the point where they do indeed agree with me that the natural selection paradox is true. But rather than reject evolutionary theory, they often get angry or they go silent. Those are the two responses that I typically get. In any event, as I say to my friend Bob here, I offer this reluctantly because evolutionists never change their minds. They never do. It's an ideology like a religious belief to evolutionists, and they will not change their minds. But I'm willing to do this because it's what I do. Okay, I signed up for this and I do it. Now, Bob, he has some things about whether I believe in evolution by natural selection, which again is not in question. I believe in evolution. I believe in natural selection. I believe in evolution by natural selection. I just don't believe that natural selection does what people think it does, thus the natural selection paradox. And then he goes on to say that I have to tell him what it is I do believe in. Again, Bob is wasting my time at this point. These, first of all, are not relevant to the question at hand that we've been talking about online. It has nothing to do with the video dropping the bomb on evolution. And this statement that you can't be just against something, but you have to be for something else is simply not true. And again, I don't know why people who want to engage with me online say things like this, because it's simply not true and it doesn't matter. Even if I am for something else, it does not change the question at hand, which is whether the natural selection paradox is true. But nevertheless, this is what Bob said. But anyway, he says, yeah, go ahead and ask, what are your questions? Now, at this point, I need to take a few minutes. Please bear with me and be patient, because I need to review basically the fundamentals of what evolutionary theory must explain that was part of what I explained in the dropping the bomb video, which led to Bob's emailing me. Okay, I'm going to take a few minutes and we're going to talk about necessary evolutionary change. This is very important for people to understand, and let's talk about what is it that evolutionary theory, what kind of change must it explain if it is a true explanation for all current species? Now we can start with this little diagram here. I call this an icon of evolution. I am not presenting this as some kind of a fact statement. I'm not trying to make some statement about who were the ancestors of humans, but if evolutionary theory is true, this little diagram at least conceptually helps us understand what it must explain. Specifically, it must explain how something then that was not human turned over in time, changed over time, and turned into every current species today, including humans. So what we are facing when we talk about necessary evolutionary change is, how did the genotype, the code of genetic building instructions inside of human beings that instructs to build the phenotype, the thing built by the coded building instructions, how did this genotype to build this phenotype arrive on Earth over time from this genotype to build this phenotype? So the question is, if this thing, and again, I'm not trying to say anything, I mean, maybe it was a monkey, maybe it was an ape, some sort of a humanoid creature. It was what it was. It was a phenotype of it because it had a genotype, the genetic coded building instructions to build it. And evolutionary theory purports to explain how that genotype to build that thing changed into the genotype, the coded building instructions to build human beings. Now, if we look at this, what we're talking about is the change to genotypes, the genetic coded building instructions, and their associated phenotypes. So this genetic coded building instructions built this. According to evolutionary theory, it changed over time to a different code of building instructions to build this, and down the line, you get the idea. Now, if we look at this little progression here, it's halfway believable, at least it's plausible. We can kind of in our minds imagine it might be. But this progression is not what evolutionary theory purports to explain. This progression is. And again, I'm not trying to make a fact statement. I just populated this line with arbitrary organisms. But if evolutionary theory is true, This line can be populated with an unbroken sequence of parent to offspring organisms in an unbroken line of descent all the way to every current species, including human beings. It's every current species. Every current species on Earth today can trace its evolutionary ancestral lineage in an unbroken chain of organisms all the way back to some first theorized living organism. So this is what the necessary evolutionary change that evolutionary theory must explain, is how the genotype to build this first thing changed over time to be the genotype, the genetic coded building instructions to build a very different thing, and down the line until finally there's some coded genetic building instructions to build something completely, entirely different. This is the necessary evolutionary change. We can talk about evolution of genotypes and evolution of phenotypes. Now, this idea that every current species today can trace its evolutionary lineage in an unbroken chain of ancestral descent back to a first living thing, I assure you this is not my idea, and it is not controversial. Evolutionists attempt to show this idea with something called phylogenetic trees, and here is one. Phylogenetic trees attempt to build a diagram to show how from some first living thing, every current living thing today exists. In this diagram, it is at the domain level, but of course, here's animals. This could continue out to every species of animals today. But the idea is that any current species alive today can trace its lineage in an unbroken line of descent all the way back to a first living thing, and this idea becomes extremely important in understanding the natural selection paradox. And that's what we're going to look at. In our case, we're going to take human beings because that seems to be a species of interest to most of us. The idea again being that from this first living thing, from parent to offspring, parent to offspring, parent to offspring, all the way out, unbroken chain of living organisms, and here we are today, human beings. So here is my question again to my friend Bob. Bob answers, what are your questions? And here is question number one. I want to make sure that Bob agrees with evolutionary theory that all current species can trace an unbroken lineage of ancestral descent from a first life form on Earth. This is this idea of a phylogenetic tree. And indeed, Bob says yes. Okay, good, because if we didn't agree here, we wouldn't have much to talk about. He says, I look forward to your next question. Here is question two. Now I'm going to jump forward on our phylogenetic tree and get to the animal line. And my question in question two is, all current animal species, I'm asking if he agrees with this statement, all current animal species, including human beings, Homo sapiens, can trace an unbroken lineage of ancestral descent from the first animal life form, and I'm calling that animal number one, on Earth. And of course, on back to the first life form on Earth. Here is the idea here. In that unbroken line of descent, there had to be a point on that line where the first animal on Earth appeared. This is just logical reasoning. If in the past there were no animals, and today there are animals, there had to be a first animal that appeared on Earth, and that was the start of the animal line on our phylogenetic tree. Bob writes back, sure. And then he has a lot of words to go with this. What's important is that he agrees that this is true. Again, Bob tends to put a lot of words with a question that requires a short answer, but at least he did say sure. Now we go to question number three. Don't look at Bob's answer here yet, it's too long. But here now, I'm going to ask a very important question. We know that there had to be a first animal on Earth. What about the second animal? I'm asking if he agrees this is true. Animal number two arrived on Earth as offspring of animal number one. And if animal number two differed in genotype, so if its genetic coded building instructions were different from that of animal one, the differences were due solely to random evolutionary changes. That is the statement. What this statement, by the way, is a true statement if evolutionary theory is true. There is only one source of new genotypes on Earth, and that is in the offspring of parent organisms, and the offspring inherit genetically modified genetic variation, genetic mutations in their genotype, okay? So this is a key question. From animal 1 to animal 2, what was the evolutionary mechanism that produced it? And I'm saying it was produced solely by random evolutionary changes, particularly random genetic variation or genetic mutations. Okay, but here Bob has a problem. No, probably not. And I left this up here because undoubtedly some of you read this. There's a lot of words here. I'm not going to go through all these words because Bob is either being knowingly or unknowingly obtuse. This is a very simple question, and it has a very simple answer. But sometimes evolutionists like Bob, realizing what the answer to this question is and maybe realizing the implications, become very obtuse around words like random. So he asks here things like, he takes issue with this due solely to random evolutionary changes. He says something happened that animal 2 is slightly different than animal 1. What that was is unknown. This is simply untrue. If evolutionary theory is the fact of science that we are told, we know exactly where the slightly different genotypes of offspring come from, and it comes from heritable genetic variation. Okay, so he's simply being obtuse, or maybe he doesn't know. It could have been a subtle change in one part of the gene. It could have been. It doesn't matter. That's not the question. What random evolutionary changes are you referring to? It depends. No, it doesn't. Any random evolutionary changes. Take your pick. There aren't that many. This is not a mystery. This is pretty standard evolutionary theory we're talking about. He says, but change is not suddenly genotypically identifiable. It doesn't matter. That's not in the question. It doesn't matter if it's identifiable. It doesn't matter if there's even any change to the phenotype. I'm simply asking if animal 2 evolved with a different genotype from animal 1, what was the evolutionary cause? And he says that we wouldn't even notice the change. Of course we wouldn't. That doesn't matter. Okay, anyway, he wants me to be more precise if I want a yes or no question. I can see this is not going to go well at this point, but I continue. So I have to let him know that, look, evolutionary changes are either random or non-random. There's no other choice. As to what random evolutionary changes I'm referring to, it doesn't matter. The question is simply asked whether the evolutionary change from animal 1 to animal 2 is any random change posited by evolutionary theory. The propositional statement for question 3, sorry, I'm going to read this. You can take a nap here if you want. Assumes a change in genotype as this is a necessity for evolutionary change according to evolutionary theory. The truth of the statement does not depend on how subtle or how noticeable. The truth of the statement does not depend on whether animal 2 is indistinguishable to us or something we could see. Such factors are irrelevant to the statement of question 3. So I asked him to try again. This is an easy one if he doesn't overthink it, and that is in fact true. Now, I actually decided to make it even easier for Bob, and I did a modified question 3, and here it is. I asked if he agrees that this statement is true. Assuming animal 2 evolved from animal 1, so this is the second animal on Earth evolving from the first animal on Earth, animal 2 evolved due solely to random evolutionary processes. Okay, that's the statement I'm asking him to agree is true or not. Now, Bob, of course, is going to continue to be a little obtuse here. It's okay. He's a nice guy, and I have time, okay? It's a crazy situation, I know. But he says I would still have to argue, what do you mean by random evolutionary? And he says progress. I think he meant process. Define what you think it means. And of course, he continues. Well, let's see. The randomness is not really arbitrary. It has a cause. These are the kind of statements that make me think I'm wasting my time. Okay, nobody is questioning whether randomness is arbitrary or has a cause or not. That is not the issue. Then he says some things during a creature's evolution were discernible, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he's not answering the question. Okay, this is not helpful. So I asked him again, Do you agree this statement is true? Assuming I want him to just answer this question, okay? This is not hard, all right? Now, Bob went to Wikipedia apparently, and now he's going to opine on evolutionary theory for me. And I include this because, once again, this is a very common response I get from evolutionists. I'm asking a simple question, and it has a simple answer. This is evolutionary 101 stuff. And Bob is going to return this thing that looks like he probably got it off of Wikipedia. And he's going to talk about random processes, mutations, genetic drift, non-random processes, natural selection, all of these things. Okay, I don't deny that these are true, but they are irrelevant to the question. I am asking, based on known scientific evolutionary theory, when there is a change in a genotype, from a parent to an offspring, what kind of evolutionary change are we talking about? What was the evolutionary mechanism? Was it random or non-random? So I, once again, just ask this question. I want the answer to this question. Now, the answer is in here because it is genetic changes alone that explain animal 2 evolving from animal 1. So the answer is random processes alone. But Bob continues to believe that all of these things are somehow playing a role, and he can't quite explain how, but he's sure they do. And so he is not going to agree with me that this statement is true. Now, he decides to opine even more. Bear with me as I bear with him. He says, while mutations are random, their evolutionary fate is shaped by non-random selection. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to the question, okay? Mutations are random, and it was mutations that produced animal 2. Whether or not the fate of animal 2 is shaped by non-random selection is not the question. We're not asking about the fate of animal 2. We're asking about the origin of animal 2. What evolutionary processes allowed animal 2 to arise on Earth as the offspring of animal 1? So he says my dichotomy between solely random and intelligently guided. I have never mentioned the term intelligently guided. I've never used that term. It's not in my vocabulary with respect to creation reformation. I don't know where this comes from. Again, this is an example of evolutionists projecting what they think I know, believe, or mean into their responses. Natural selection requires no conscious intent. Nobody asked about that. I don't believe it requires conscious intent. No, that is not at issue here. He says my question is not as simple as I think. And again, a big red flag, a clue that I'm dealing with someone who either does not understand evolutionary theory or will not answer a simple question. He says, in summary, animal 2's evolution would involve both random mutations and non-random selection. And this is simply not true. Animal 2 arises due solely to the random mutations inherited from animal 1. It has not faced any selection pressure yet. I ask him again because I just want him to answer this question. Okay, this is, I'm trying to make a simple question and get a simple answer. Finally, I don't get an answer from him, and I say, I am assuming that you disagree with the statement of question 3 is a true statement. So I introduce question 4. I say, I just assume you disagree. Forget all the words, forget all the extraneous details, forget the Wikipedia articles. Let's go to question 4. And here we get to, here my questions are modified again. Sorry. I'm going to try to break it down and even make it more simple for him. I say question 4, and unfortunately I fail to make this in the form of a question, but you get it. It is a question. I say, explain precisely 1. What evolutionary change produced animal 2 as evolved offspring of animal 1? First, just state what that is. And then, as a second step, how any of the non-random evolutionary mechanisms explain this evolutionary change. And just a background, I apologize for this. He had provided me earlier, not the one I showed you, but actually a different list of evolutionary mechanisms broken down by random and non-random. So I'm asking him how many of his non-random evolutionary mechanisms explain whatever he identifies as the evolutionary change to produce animal 2. You see what I'm doing here? I'm just trying to even make this simpler. It is not complicated and it's not mysterious. I ask him to provide numbered answers to the above two questions and to be concise. He does neither. And this is, again, I face this all the time. I put numbered questions and I ask for numbered answers and I don't get them. I rarely get conciseness. And so I'm going to put this little question up here and we're going to look at what Bob responded. I'm not even going to read all this, okay? He's just obfuscating. I mean, these words mean nothing in terms of this question. He is either wanting to obfuscate or he simply doesn't know. His mind is truly muddled with enough evolutionary jargon to make himself believe that indeed my question leaves out so much, okay? He says here, natural selection does not generate new traits. Why is he writing that? There is no, of course it doesn't. Nobody is contending it does. And yet he feels he's compelled to write things like that. He says, my paradox cannot treat randomness as absolute and purely internal and then have selection. It doesn't. These words are, I don't know where these words are coming from, okay? But I like Bob. He's a nice enough guy. And so he puts some things in here. It takes a very long time. It could be many things. It seems I'm framing evolution in a way that ignores how random mutations and non-random selection. I am not. This question does not ignore any of that. Time doesn't matter. Maybe it could be many things. What are they? Bob, what are they? Of course, it could be many things. Tell me what they could be. Okay, Bob is not going to do this. I get back to him. Your answer of it could be many things is not precise or helpful. And then here I list the list that he provided in an earlier email that I referred to earlier, okay? He says he has listed these. I say, which of these mechanisms operated to produce animal 2 as the evolved offspring of animal 1? Note it's irrelevant to the question of how or why animal 1 exists. The question is limited solely to how animal 2 as the evolved child offspring of animal 1 was produced. And I ask him to think about this carefully before he answers again. Now, again, I ask him, just give me the mechanism. I say, don't offer color commentary, long explanations, or extraneous information. Don't do that. Just name the mechanism and state precisely how it explains the evolution of animal 2 as the offspring of animal 1. And actually, Bob delivered. He actually said, evolutionary change producing animal 2 from animal 1. A genetic mutation occurs during gamete formation in animal 1. This mutation is heritable and carried into animal 2, introducing a novel genetic variant upon which various biological mechanisms act over generations. He is exactly right. Yes, various biological mechanisms might act over generations, but with respect to where animal 2 came from and how animal 2 got here, he is right. So there is a big yes. I breathe a sigh of relief. Okay, Bob has finally answered this question, and he has identified correctly that the only evolutionary mechanism that explains the evolution of the second animal on Earth from the first animal is genetic. It's actually genetic variation. It's probably genetic mutation. So I'm going to give him credit here for this. But then he feels compelled again to go on and opine on non-random processes determining the mutation's impact. Okay, I put 3 dotted lines here. I don't know. I don't know. He went on for pages with this information. Okay, that's not the question. But here he says, while mutation introduces randomness, yes, it does. Let's stick with that. The interplay of differential survival, reproductive advantage, and reliable heritability alongside additional genetic processes guides the evolutionary trajectory, ultimately producing animal 2. So he's continuing to use this language of guidance, guides an evolutionary trajectory. Okay, this is He's not willing to let go that even though mutations introduce randomness, there's still some hidden, mysterious guidance, directionality to this evolutionary trajectory. Now, I have this again. I'm not sure why that's there. We're going to ignore that, okay? Up here, I want to focus on what Bob said. This is exactly right. And I'm going to give him credit for that, okay? Now, I responded. You correctly answered the first part of question 4. You provided it in number 1 of your previous reply, and you are correct, okay? I want to acknowledge that. The only evolutionary change that occurred to produce animal 2 as the offspring of animal 1 was genetic variation, likely genetic mutation, passed from animal 1 to animal 2, and that is a completely random event in evolutionary processes, okay? Then the second part of question 4, where he got all muddled, okay, with lots of extraneous information. I asked how many of your non-random mechanisms explain this genetic variation, okay, that evolutionary change, genetic variation in animal 1 past animal 2. The answer, I'm just going to give him the answer because this will go nowhere forever. The answer to that second part is none. None of the changes in your number 2, the non-random things like natural selection, none of these have anything to do with introducing the genetic variation in animal 1 that is passed to animal 2. I tell him if he agrees, I will ask question number 5. Bob again replies with this long explanation here, okay? And again, there's extraneous information, there's false information. This right here, in animal 2, beneficial mutations inherited from animal 1 were filtered and amplified by natural selection. This is simply false. This is a flat out, this is not evolutionary theory if he believes this. Natural selection cannot operate on an organism until after it is in nature. And it arrives in nature with its genotype that it receives as mutations from its parents. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This kind of statement is so obviously incorrect in evolutionary theory, it's hard to deal with, really, okay, except to simply ignore it. But look at what he says down here. He's going to continue to talk about evolution 2 is a coherent, directional process rather than a product of pure chance, okay? Look at all this. He says it may seem random, but their occurrence is biased. It's biased somehow, okay? They were filtered and amplified. That's simply not true. We dealt with that. But over generations, this interplay between the non-random biases in mutation, there are no non-random biases in mutation. There may be reasons why certain mutations happen and don't happen, but there's no bias towards any direction, okay? And he says that demonstrates that the evolution of animals is a coherent directional process, okay? This is not evolutionary theory. Bob is simply wrong here, okay? The randomness of mutations that produce variation in the genetic coded building instructions of offspring have no directionality to them. You might imagine some directionality happening later with natural selection, eliminating some of the new genotypes that appear in nature, but that is not what we're talking about here, okay? Bob is confused. Now, here I ask again this question. He did not answer my question. All his talk about targeted outcome-driven pressures of natural selection is not only plainly wrong, there are no targets or outcomes to drive to in a blind, purposeless nature, but it just fails to answer my question. I'm confident you will never read to fully understand my questions, okay? I hate to say this to Bob, but it's true. He just never will. He will never understand what I'm writing and answer the questions I'm asking. Okay, his answers will continue to be filled with hopeful ideas about mutations being directed or biased, which are ideas foreign to evolutionary theory. They simply are. I'm not making this up. And if people want to fact check me. But I say thank you for being a good sport. I will make a video recap of this exchange soon, and in it I will reveal question 5. And the remaining logical argument to the natural selection paradox. I will not use your real name. I haven't. His real name is not Bob. And I'll let you know when it's produced. Now, let's go to question 5. Here was an earlier question And here is Bob's answer that I agree with. Okay, sorry, it has caught me a little bit by surprise. I'm just reviewing. Okay, Bob agreed with this. Bob agreed that this statement is true, that the assuming that animal 2 evolved from animal 1, animal 2 evolved due solely to random evolutionary processes. Okay, fair enough. He recognizes that a genetic mutation occurred. Now, here is the next question. Sorry, once again, I'm getting myself confused here. I apologize. If you're still with me, by the way, I hope you're interested in tracking. We get complete metrics on our videos at YouTube, and by this time in a video, there's only one of you watching anyway. So to you, I apologize for the mix-ups here. I'm going to keep going because this is not, I'm going to keep going. It'll get better, don't worry. Okay, now, this was Bob's answer. I just want to make sure that when we're talking about genetic mutations, it is a novel random genetic variant. Now, Bob didn't put the word random in there because he doesn't like that word and he's a little bit afraid of it apparently, but I want to make sure that we understand that's what's happening. So if we go back to our phylogenetic tree here and we understand that animals, let's just say animals start here. In fact, let's isolate this little square right here and let's make it bigger. We can say that when the animal line broke off, there was, as we said, a first animal. Logically speaking, there had to be an animal number 1, and its offspring was animal number 2. Bob agrees that the only evolutionary mechanism that produced animal 2 from animal 1 was a genetic mutation. And in fact, it could have been more than one genetic mutation. It was genetic variation in general that introduces a novel random genetic variant into animal 2. Okay? Let's see if we're going to get question 5 here. Sure enough, we are. Let's just go to the next step. Assuming that animal number 3 evolved from animal number 2 in the line of Homo sapiens, okay? Because these can be branching off to other species. Let's just take our line of humans. Assuming that in that line, animal number 3, how did it evolve? Do you agree this animal 3 evolved due solely to random evolutionary processes? And the only answer to that question, based on the understanding that we all have now, Bob will never have it, is that animal 3 would evolve from the same evolutionary processes. That is, animal number 3 here is going to evolve based solely on genetic variation received in the offspring from animal number 2. Okay, that's the only place new genetic codes come from. They are not produced in nature any other way. The only way there could be an animal 3 evolve from animal 2 is if animal 2 passes on genetic variants in the genetic coded building instructions of animal 3. Now, of course, here is the key to understanding. You and me, we are animal number n, right? The number is so high now we couldn't even fathom it probably. Before us, there was animal number 1, and that was your parents, okay? We'll call it animal number n-1 were your parents. You evolved. You arrived on Earth from your parents. Your existence was due solely or your phenotype, your traits and features, the coded building instructions in you arose on Earth solely by the random genetic variation passed in your genetic code from your parents. And so we can trace this line all the way back. In fact, we can make every organism, let's just say that every dot represents an organism. Every one of these organisms on this line, this unbroken line from a first life form to every current species today, including human beings, was produced solely by random evolutionary change, primarily random genetic change. And so we have our natural selection paradox. Every current species evolved from a first life form down here solely by cumulative random evolutionary change. All of this evolutionary change, it's random, is cumulative. It's error upon error. It's randomness upon randomness. Does natural selection remove some of it? Yes, that's what natural selection does. But natural selection cannot bring order out of order. It cannot bring non-randomness in the genetic code out of randomness. All natural selection can do is eliminate some of the randomness in nature and let other randomness proceed. And the randomness that proceeds does so not because of natural selection, but despite natural selection. And if you study this diagram based on our explanation, you will have to agree with me that the natural selection paradox is in fact a true statement. And as a true statement, it renders the theory of evolution by natural selection unbelievable as a scientific explanation. So there you go. If you disagree with me, again, I invite you to contact me at creationreformation@protonmail.com. I will respond personally. I would invite you, before you reach me, to go to our video channel and watch this video, Dropping the Bomb on Evolution. Again, put it on 1.25 speed, it'll be more bearable. There is also a video called The Silver Bullet that is shorter and equally persuasive to explain why the natural selection paradox. Okay, I'm going to end here. If I've done things right, on the next screen, you will see a link to this video, Dropping the Bomb on Evolution, and an image of our natural selection paradox icon down here, right here, and you can click on that to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I hope you will. But for now, I am going to say good day and goodbye.